Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, there we go. Now we got sound. Sweet. Okay, nistunatanaku omahkesto akaki no pahtutu sitsikitsi tapiksakom. Hello, everyone. My name is Walking Raven Woman. My passport or government name is Mariah Gladstone. I'm super excited to be here with you guys today. I love seeing the fresh snow on the ground. I know that back home in Montana, it'll probably look like this when I land, though it doesn't right now. So I'm super excited to be experiencing this cool change of season time and the celebration of harvest with you guys. To get us started, I want to kind of ground us in a little bit of the history of Indigenous food systems and how they've been used to target Native people. But then also with that recognition, we can dive into so much of the really cool work that's being done and get to do a cool cooking demonstration as well. As a Blackfeet person living in Blackfeet lands in Montana, my identity is very much linked to that landscape. There are a number of ways I can see the interactions with that space as they have occurred for thousands of years. You know, we still practice our traditional hunting practices to a degree, our gathering practices, but also so much of that was very intentionally taken away from us. So from the very early days of the United States government, the US used food systems as a method to control Native people. You look at the orders that George Washington gave to Major General Sullivan to march against the Haudenosaunee Confederacy when the United States was 2 years old. And he wrote in those orders to burn the villages, but also to burn the croplands, the storehouses of food, the seed banks, so that they will not be able to plant again. And it was that very intentional targeting that decimated Haudenosaunee villages, to the point where Haudenosaunee languages still translate the word for president as village burner. That strategy of using food systems as a way of controlling Native people continued with westward expansion. On the Great Plains, of course, we had vast herds of buffalo. And no matter where villages moved, there was always food because there was always buffalo. And the army and settlers realized this. And so instead of targeting Native people, they decided to start a large-scale campaign against the buffalo or the bison, right? And it was written in the 1850 Commissioner of Indian Affairs report. It is cheaper in the end to feed the whole flock for a year than to fight them for a week. Essentially saying, let's eliminate Native people's ability to feed themselves, force people to depend on government-issued rations so that they won't bite the hand that feeds them, and use that as the system of control. It was with that motivation that the number of buffalo on the prairies dropped from about 60 million to, by the time Montana became a state in 1889, less than 1,000. And with that, we lost not only an animal that we relied on for food, but also clothing, shelter, ceremony, tools, so many other things. And then United States policy at the time, then turned into this desire to civilize the Indians, of course, by turning us into good farmers and ranchers. Of course, moving away from community agriculture, community hunting, subsistence farming and gathering, and instead transitioning to all of these policies designed to cut the land into little pieces of individually or family-owned properties, and then make us into good civilized farmers and ranchers. And with that, there was, of course, a massive transition away from community systems of food, and instead to very individualized systems in climates where farming and ranching doesn't always work. It's a challenge. And I'm sure that you guys recognize that more than most. But that doesn't mean that there's no food, right? Just because our homes are not well suited for farming or ranching, that doesn't mean that there isn't an abundance of food in those places. And now there is so many discussions about the impact, the long-term impacts of this forced transition to these rations. And then after that, we had other types of subsidized meal programs, like the commodity food program, where food during the Great Depression, and still to this day, comes in prepackaged, shelf-stable boxes, where you try to make something edible out of it. And then other forms of subsidized food programs, which again still rely on having access to a grocery store with fresh foods, like WIC and SNAP and things like that. And so now we're seeing communities with extremely high rates of diabetes, malnutrition, obesity, heart disease, all of these diet-related illnesses that our people were not dealing with prior to this massive shift. So now there's a massive movement to restore food sovereignty, that ability to feed ourselves again. So food sovereignty is a cool word, but it also has a big multi-tiered definition. Food sovereignty, as defined by the peasants' movement, La Via Campesina, is the right of people to healthy, affordable, culturally appropriate food, harvested through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to govern those food systems, right? We can make food that's healthy. We can get food that's healthy, meets our basic nutrition goals. But if the poorest people in our communities can't afford that, we don't have food sovereignty. Culturally appropriate. That can mean a lot of different things. It means a different thing in Alaska than it does in the Southwest, right? Culturally appropriate just means that there are things that we recognize as foods. I joke around and say, I could make a whole school lunch menu in Montana that's entirely insect-based, and it would be healthy and it would be affordable, but we don't really see insects as food. So it's not necessarily culturally appropriate. It's not necessarily things that we see as foods that people are going to be super excited to eat. And also just putting food in front of people, maybe it's a tasteless mash of whatever, even if it meets your basic nutrition goals, is that really what it means to have food sovereignty? No. Of course, ecologically sound and sustainable methods, we want to make sure that however we're getting our food, however we're harvesting, hunting, gathering, fishing, farming, whatever it may be, is not affecting future generations' ability to do the same. And that's really what it means to have sustainability, right? You can have really productive farms, but if they rely on destroying the underground ecosystems, the soil health, if they rely on synthetic fertilizers that are killing the fish populations nearby, then that's not sustainable and it won't last. And those are things that we have to be thinking about. And then, of course, the right to govern those food systems, the right to regulate those systems. And also, I think part of that is honoring the places that those foods come from, honoring those foods themselves. For people that grow up hunting, for my family, that's elk and moose and deer, and thankfully still buffalo. We have treaty rights to hunt just outside of Yellowstone National Park, and antelope. There is a gift that comes from eating that food from the land, but it also, by recognizing that gift from the land, when someone gives you a gift, there is also a sense of reciprocity. a desire to give a gift back. And for some people, that means putting tobacco down. For some people, that is saying a prayer when they take an animal's life. For those of us that practice subsistence hunting, it also means utilizing all parts of that animal. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've argued with my cousins, not argued, but been very frustrated because we had to go and cut up all of the moose bones, right? And then we had to go and turn the moose bones, and we had to render all of the tallow from the marrow, and then we had to turn all of that into moose broth, and we had to freeze them because we had to honor the entire animal. I think my only argument was that we hand sawed all of those bones. And I'm like, can't we just use a sawzall? As long as the sawzall doesn't have paint on the blades, you're good for the future. If anyone tries to get you to hand saw a whole bunch of bones, sawzaws are really helpful. Bandsaws if you have access to a butcher shop. But there is an honor in that. There's an honor in learning how to tan hides. Let me tell you, if you start tanning your own hides, you learn how to be really careful with a knife when you're skinning an animal, because you quickly learn how fast those holes can open up. But there is a whole recognition of those gifts. And also, when you are out on the land and you're participating in those food systems, you also learn how to sense those changes. Whether those be changes that come from climate change, over harvesting, whether that be diseases that are being spread through tree populations or anything of that. When you're out on the land, you learn to see those things. And it is folks that are spending time on the land that are some of the most critical record keepers, and those that really should have much, much louder voices in making those policies that affect those systems, right? We know that there has been changes in the way that we count whale populations, right? Simply because people were not listening to Indigenous knowledge keepers and recognizing whale migrations. There's a lot of traditional ecological knowledge, if you guys have heard TEK, right? That's now starting to be incorporated into policy making, but sometimes just as a cool sidebar, like cool Indian things off to the side, and not necessarily recognized as science yet. And that's really important just in the way that we recognize the management of those systems. Indigenous people on these landscapes have been successfully managing thriving populations of animals and plants for thousands of years. And recognizing how those things are able to occur is really critical also to navigating how we can manage that today, but also how we can adapt to changing conditions and climate. I know that, for example, tribes in Northern California have traditionally practiced a lot of burning, right? Low intensity burns designed to help eliminate some of that deadfall from the understory of the forest, right? It keeps healthy populations of plant life in the forest, and it also reduces a lot of biomass that can contribute to really dangerous forest fires. And then we had a big period of Smokey the Bear, thou shalt have zero fires. And it turned into, of course, an accumulation of biomass, and that combined with climate change has led to extra destructive forest fires. And that goes anywhere in the country where we've had to navigate, of course, those policies that, of course, with dramatic reduction in Indigenous populations, the forests were already missing a lot of that management. And then cap that onto Western science, which wasn't grounded in Indigenous realities, and you end up with systems that are really, really out of balance. And so part of recovering that is part of not only restoring balance to the ecosystems, but also to restoring access to healthy, sustainable, culturally appropriate food within our communities. And of course, with all of that, also just good nutrition for ourselves, for our landscapes, for our families. And I think there's that additional benefit. When you're out on the land, not only do you know how to take care of the land better, but you feel more at home there, and you feel a better sense of grounding and belonging to that place. So with that, I get to extra ground myself in some Alaska foods because I'm going to walk you guys through a super simple cooking demonstration. So I have cod that is local, as well as these really cool hydroponic greens. And then I have a couple of other ingredients. I have some blueberries, I have some apple cider vinegar, a little bit of oil, salt and pepper. I'm not hiding anything from you guys. I also don't know what my camera situation is yet because I don't see it up there. So I also have a pepper that, there we go, cool. I have a pepper, this pepper has a story, because it's Native American Heritage Month. So for me, that means that my schedule is incredibly busy. I joke around and say it's Adopt an Indian Month because everyone suddenly is like, oh, we need Native programming. And so it means that I live on the road during November. And last weekend, I was at the Idle-Jorg Museum in Indianapolis, and I flew to Washington, D.C., and I gave a cooking demonstration for Food History Weekend at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. So I was there and I wrapped up my cooking demonstration. We did a cool Three Sisters soup with buffalo meat. It was super fun. And then there was like all these bags of peppers in the back of their test kitchen because the chef that had did a demonstration before me was from New Mexico, and they'd brought a ton of peppers. And I guess they didn't want to fly home with them. So it was a New Mexico green chili. They also had red chilies too. So they had green chilies and red chilies. And of course, someone offered me a bag of chilies. And they're like, you want some New Mexico green chilies? I'm like, of course I do. So I flew back with them from DC in my carry-on, as you do, with a big bag of New Mexico green chilies and red chilies. I flew into Bozeman, Montana, because my boyfriend does movie stunts and he was working on a Western down there. So I just hung out with him and I put them in the little hotel fridge and they stayed there for a couple days. And then I went home. I think I left this pepper in my car overnight, so it froze, but it's fine. And then I drove to the airport yesterday and they told me that the plane had a flat tire. And apparently there's not a lot of plane tires in Montana. So I got delayed to today. So I drove back to the reservation, back to the airport today. And then the pepper got to hang out in my carry-on again as I flew through Seattle and up here. So now this pepper is here, and it's gonna become part of a blueberry salsa. Totally unnecessary to have the pepper, but it came with me and it needed a home. And also, as I said, it froze, so it should probably be used relatively quickly now. I have a couple bulbs of garlic and shallots, actually. And then, as was mentioned, I have chives and oregano for my herbs. So what I'm going to do is actually get started cutting some of these things. I'm going to take the seeds out of this cool green chili so that it's not super spicy. But I just want to cut this guy up into smaller pieces here. And then I'm gonna cut up the shallots and the garlic. And, oh, there were more seeds in that part than I anticipated. Here we go. And then I'm going to saute this green chili with the shallots and the garlic, kind of soften everything up a little bit. And then I'm gonna add these blueberries. These blueberries are fresh, but you could just as easily use frozen blueberries, especially if you have some wild harvested ones that you've gone out and picked. If you have different type of berries, you could definitely do that. For Blackfeet people, meat and berries is a super common theme. Now, we normally do buffalo meat. We don't have cod in on the Blackfeet Res, but the idea is still there. That sweetness with the savoriness of the meat is really, really good together. And also, I have a little bit of apple cider vinegar because it adds that tanginess that I think is really nice in fish. Of course, fish is so basic. Not basic like, oh my God, you're so basic, but basic on the pH scale. And so it's nice to have an acid with it, which is why we put lemon juice on fish, and that helps balance the pH of the food. You can do the same thing with a vinegar. And we're in Alaska. It's a little bit easier to get apple cider vinegar or to make your own vinegar, whatever it may be, than it is to grow lemons, though I bet somebody's doing a cool thing with lemons out there, or an underground greenhouse. I don't know what you guys have, but I did one time see, it was a lemon tree. It was a lemon tree and an orange tree growing in Montana in a straw bale greenhouse at 7,000 feet elevation. So this is a mountaintop. And someone built a straw bale greenhouse that was straw bale on 3 sides. And then they had a solar, it had a fluid, it wasn't water, but it snaked through kind of the top part of this roof. And then the pipes ran underground and they used that to passively heat the greenhouse. And they had oranges and lemons growing in this greenhouse on a mountaintop. And I walked through about 3 feet of snow to get to the greenhouse. So I was like, I don't know what you're doing, but it's cool. It's real cool. So somebody can do something cool. All right, I'm gonna toss some of these scraps off to the side. Extra reminder to wash my hands before I wipe my eyes later. No. Okay, this is a shallot. So I'm just gonna take this papery part off of it, if I can get that. And then I also have a couple of garlic bulbs as well. So I changed my mind about this. I'm not going to saute this shallot in here because we're doing a cool salsa and we can have a raw shallot, which is just like an onion, only slightly less intense flavored, which I guess that is worth mentioning if you're not familiar. I have chives, of course, but chives chives are fairly similar to wild onions or green onions. If you guys harvest cool things in that family, almost everything in that allium genus is edible. So they're gonna add some cool color to our salsa, but I'm going to add those in after. As for this, I'm going to cook up this garlic a little bit. So fastest way to get this paper off of the garlic, for me, wow, I should hit that harder, is to basically use the side of your knife like a garlic press. And you can punch the garlic and then the paper will fall right off. So I'm just gonna mince up this garlic. Also, this oregano looks super cool. It's the first year that they've grown oregano. So this is an experiment, but it looks beautiful. There's a old Park Service cabin near where I live. It was built in 1910, and it originally housed some of the rangers that stayed in Glacier National Park year round and kind of were the caretakers of that little part of Glacier on the east side of the mountains, which is the much more isolated part. And I was doing a presentation, I was doing a plant walk outside. So we were going and we were walking around, and we have a lot of the same plants in that part of Montana that there are in kind of inland parts of Alaska. So I was pointing out fireweed, and I was pointing out, we have thimbleberries, which are another type of compound berry, kind of similar to salmon berries. So I was walking around, there's butter's great. I'll use butter. Well, I think we can, sweet butter balls. I always wanted to do a demo with a giant thing of butter balls. This is the best. Okay. Wait, I'm telling one story, but now I'm distracted and I have another story. Anyway, I was walking outside this cabin doing a plant walk and pointing out things. There's cow parsnip, there's aspens and, Savis berries and huckleberry, all sorts of things, right? And I was looking and I was like, what is that? And I was like, this is something really familiar. And I was trying to place it and I was running through I was like, is that mint? No, it's not mint. What is that? And I looked down and there's a giant patch of oregano. I was like, why is there oregano here? It's not a wild plant that we have. In 1910, when there was actually a family living in this little cabin, which is now just a ranger station that has no running water, they had a little kitchen garden outside, and oregano is pretty happy to be a perennial, even when the temperatures get to 40 below regularly. And so this oregano stayed even after a family stopped caring for the kitchen garden. And now there's a little patch of oregano that I can always go and find oregano in Montana in the summer, because that's somebody planted it one time. Yes, I'm so excited about this. Okay, so I was in Rome 2 weeks ago for the World Food Forum and the Global Indigenous Youth Forum, and at the last minute, they asked me to make a soup. And so I was like, all right, a soup for 300 people is kind of a big lift to do at the last minute. And I was like, whatever. So I sent a list of ingredients. I was like, tell me if you can't find anything. And they said, no, everything's good. Everything was not good. I asked for canned pumpkin, which in my head, I'm like, it's pumpkin season. And there's no canned pumpkin in Italy. So we roasted pumpkin, and I got my pureed pumpkin after all. And I had wanted coconut milk because I was just making a big soup. I wanted it to be creamy without having dairy in it. And I said, okay, well, if you can't find coconut milk, can you find just heavy cream? Like, it's not indigenous, but also I recognize we're in Rome. I'm not going to find North American indigenous foods at the last minute here. So give me some heavy cream. I'm like, it's Italy. We can find the base of cream-based sausage. Sorry. And they said, no, there's no heavy cream. I don't know if they didn't understand what I was asking for, or they just didn't want to understand. They came back with so much mascarpone. I don't cook with mascarpone. I'm not making mountains of tiramisu or whatever you use mascarpone. So I was working with a French chef in the kitchen. I was like, if I put this block of white, kind of solid, weird fat, if I put this into the soup, will it melt and make my soup creamy? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, guess we're doing it then. Just because I'm breathing in this pepper, which is a little spicy. That's why I'm coughing now. It's not COVID, it's the green chili that's been around the world. No. All right, okay. So, pepper's getting sauteed up. I have the garlic in here. I don't want the garlic to burn. I'm gonna add blueberries. I'm just gonna hold my breath while I'm looking at this pot. I don't know if water will help me. It's just don't breathe. That's the key. Yeah, it's not, I don't have anything in it. It's just this. So this really doesn't have to cook that long. I'm just trying to soften those blueberries and get kind of the juices The juice is tenderized in the blueberries. Is that a thing? Anyway, we're just trying to soften the blueberries real quick. This is funny. Yeah, this is funny. Okay, so this is just about done, so I'm going to turn this off the heat. And I'm going to transfer my little blueberry salsa that I've made over to here. I'm going to mix it with these shallots and cut up my chives and oregano. And they're going to sit over here because they're going to top the cod in just a second. It's a strong pepper. And it's funny because when you cook it, it's not that spicy, but the smoke is. Maybe freezing it did make the oils come out. Okay. So I have a little bit of this butter and blueberry and pepper-ish at the bottom. That's fine. It's going to stay because we're going to put a little bit of oil in there when we cook the fish, and it'll just kind of help flavor the fish a little bit more too. So this is my little salsa that I have. I'm going to cut up, let's see, here we go. I'm going to cut up some oregano for this. I love it because now my nose is running. Got all sorts of weird problems now. Okay. Here we go. Oh, the soup actually turned out very well. In conclusion, yeah, it was a little bit not how I planned it at all, and I did a lot of substitutions in it, but it worked out. It was just a little bit different than I had originally envisioned, but that was fine. Okay. So here we go. We have a blueberry salsa. I know you guys have always wanted to see really pretty pink shallots happening. Oh, just kidding. It's not that. Okay. But there we go. You guys will see it at the end in just a second. Okay, so I have a piece of cod. And you can do this with any piece of fish. You could make a blueberry salsa for salmon or halibut or anything else. This cod is just going to get a little bit of salt and pepper. I'm not going crazy with anything on it. Here, let's turn it over. Okay, and okay, now I have oil, supposedly. Yes, I do. Woo, okay. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of oil to this pan and get it heating up. And then we're just gonna pan fry this. And yes, I know this is a pot. It's gonna work perfectly for this. You can pan fry fish in a pot. If you have tongs, sometimes that's helpful. If you have a spatula, sometimes that's helpful. I have these, so that's what I'm using today. The lesson of this is do whatever you want. It's food. I actually really do like the pairing of the blueberry salsa with the fish because it adds a really lovely sweetness and a flavor and all good things to this recipe. And it's also a way of celebrating a couple really cool Alaska foods. So you can hear that sizzle, just making sure that that oil is preheated. And I just want to cook that fish all the way through. So my chunk of fish is almost an inch thick at its thickest part. So I'm going to let it cook for, we'll see, 3 to 5 minutes on each side, but we'll see how that plays out in reality. Does anyone have any questions as this fish is cooking? Yes, I'm getting an angry 5-minute sign at me. It's a passive, okay. The passive 5-minute sign. The fish will cook in exactly the amount of time that the fish takes to cook. That's what the answer is. No, questions? Are you not entertained? No. Hi, our chef can't breathe the air without coughing. Why? Okay, yes. Do I have friends or family? No. Just kidding. Do I have friends or family or other youth that I enjoy cooking with? Okay, yes. I'll repeat the question since we're having mic issues down there. Yes, so I grew up cooking. My mom took an early childhood development class, and she heard that kids that grow up cooking learn fractions better. So she's like, look, Mariah, we have 4 overripe bananas instead of 2, and the recipe calls for 2, which means we have to double everything. So I'm like, oh yeah, when you do things really it's very Montessori method, right? So I was doubling the recipe. I got to see now I have an engineering degree that I don't use, but I did get a chance to see a lot of what went into food. I felt really comfortable experimenting with food, even as a young kid. And so I got to make up recipes as a kid. So I would write them down and do all that. So my mom and I still cook a lot together. And I get to experiment a lot with that. But also, even through college, I would stress bake a lot. And so I'd always pull other people into those shenanigans. And, you know, it was a way of finding kind of friendship in that kitchen space, and sharing what knowledge I had, but also I learned that not everyone grew up cooking, right? And so I remember in 7th grade, my next door neighbor called me on the landline, right? And she was in a panic, and she's like, hey, I'm trying to cook my parents' dinner. I need your help. And of course, I'm like, she's burning her house down. So I ran over next door, and she's like, she has a thing of rice-a-roni. You guys know rice-a-roni? And she hadn't even started cooking yet. I was like, what's wrong? She goes, it says I'm supposed to heat up 1.5 cups of water in a saucepan. What is a saucepan? It's a pot. Oh, it's a pot, right? But if you didn't grow up cooking, if you didn't grow up reading recipe books, who the heck says saucepan, right? Like, it's just not a thing that you hear in a lot of our colloquial language. And so it was easier than logging into the home computer and Googling it, right? It was easier to call me. Same thing when I was in college. I smelled burning toast. So my roommate and I panicked, and we went down to the kitchen, and there was another student in the kitchen, smart woman, brilliant, all like private boarding school, right, brilliant. And she had a package of pre-made cookie dough. You basically rip it apart and bake it, right? And it was burning. And I was like, you're burning something. Can you take it out of the oven? Oh no, it has 2 more minutes left. And I was like, it's burning. This girl read the instructions, and, you know, she grew up with nannies and a boarding school. She didn't grow up cooking. So when she read the instructions and it said place pre-made cookies on a baking sheet, that didn't mean anything to her. So she went to the only sheet she could think of, which was a sheet of paper. And that's what she put in the oven. Yeah, so immediately was like, stop, like trying to fix this because the cookies are melting. The oil is like melting through the paper and they're falling onto the heating element. It's like a nightmare. And I'm trying to stop of course, it's a dorm building in New York City. So I'm trying to stop the fire alarm so that we don't all get evacuated anyway. And she's like, oh, you can cook? Yeah, I guess. She's like, well, can you teach me how to make an egg? I only know how to make them in the microwave. I don't know how to make an egg in a microwave, but I learned that I should always rope people into things also so that they don't end up burning down the kitchen. And now I get the opportunity, thank you. Now I get the opportunity to go into a lot of schools and I get to work with consumer science classes, but I also get to work in chemistry classes. We get to do acids and bases and have fun making lime that we can use to like treat corn and make hominy out of wood ashes and like turn it into a whole chemistry lab. And so I get to do really fun things like that in addition, but also it's just self-preservation. I'm trying to not make sure that people, I would rather people know how to cook and not kill us all with either food poisoning or burning things down. So I also try to make recipes that are super, super accessible. And so when I put things online, I try to also give them cooking videos so that they also have very, very easy minute and 30-second long instructions that you can follow if you get stressed out with the word saucepan, because I've been there. I've seen it. Cool. Other questions? Well, this fish is almost done. Yes. Yes. With gluten-free? Yeah, everything I do is inherently gluten-free because I'm only using ingredients that would have been found on this continent prior to 1492, minus this giant bowl of butterballs. But yeah, so of course we didn't have wheat flour, right? So everything I do is inherently gluten-free. So I do cool things. I use sunflower seed flour. I use pumpkin seed flour. Sometimes I'll use other types of root vegetable flour or cornmeal or wild rice flour or whatever it may be. There's a lot of different substitutions. But for so many Indigenous people, we weren't really grain-based. We didn't have a big grain culture like there was in Europe. So for a lot of us, we had root vegetables and meat and berries and kind of an abundance of diversity in like wild greens and herbs and things like that, but not a lot of grains. So cool. Other questions? Yes.
Hello. Can you tell us more about Indigikitchen?
Yeah, so Indigikitchen is an online resource. It's Indigenous Digital Kitchen, and it's an online resource to make that Indigenous food knowledge really accessible to people. As I covered, so much of the work to target Indigenous food systems was really intentional. So a lot of that work to restore that knowledge has to be really intentional too. And that's why I made Indigikitchen. I wanted our information to be Googleable, just as a whole bunch of other recipes are Googleable. And of course, also because so many people in our communities are, of course, living away from home villages, home reservations, right? And for those folks that are studying and going to colleges or getting their educations like people were told to do, they don't always have the ability to learn those things directly from their elders at the time when their elders are available to teach them. And so I do interview with elders, and I try to put their recipes and interviews and all of that accessible to folks as well, to make that information really easy for folks to get access to as well. Here, you know what I didn't do? Last thing. I'm just gonna add a splash of apple cider vinegar in here. That's what I forgot in the middle of the rest of this chaos. But yeah, you can go online. I'm gonna stick around after this. I have some stickers and stuff if you guys want Indigikitchen stickers. But you can go online and you can go to indigikitchen.com or follow me on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and you can have those resources as well to access. Because I think that anyone, whether they're Indigenous or not, can benefit from learning more about the traditional foods in their home. So, and yes, I did find really cool, pretty edible flowers. So there we go. Cool. Thank you guys so much. I think that officially releases you for this gap, a big break that we have, and then next thing starts at 2:30. Sweet. All right. Thank you guys. I'm gonna be around and I'll have stickers if you want them. Thanks guys.